This is GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW. Written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 169, entitled MGTOW Masculism, a Decade On. Description. This flyer imagines where the MGTOW masculist movements will be a decade from now. It anticipates the broadcast media breakthrough, the establishment of men's lib groups in every high school and college, the moral pressuring of young women to be FIPs, and the forcing of the gender politicians to menfair the gender laws, or the MGTOWs masculists will continue to reject paternity and hence annihilate the population. Now for the flyer itself. Just a minute. MGTOW masculism, a decade on. What will the MGTOW masculist movements be like a decade from now, say in 2025? That's interesting. 2 years old. This flyer attempts to answer that question. No one can predict the future accurately, so this prediction will be a mixture of what I consider is probable and what I hope will have happened by then. There are a lot of futurists who make the very good comment that the most reliable way to predict the future is to invent it. That is, if you want some future event to take place, then make it take place by doing whatever is necessary to make it happen. I will try to do some of that in the future, but I'm only one person, so there's a limit to the impact a single person can have on 7 billion people. One of the things I plan to do, probably starting in 2017, once I clear away a few things that I have on my plate at the moment that are slipping up tons of my mental energy and time, e.g. finishing annotating my paper library and finishing up putting links to my e-library, I plan to make YouTube lecture videos on masculism. Yay! That's what I'm doing now. No, pretty accurate prediction, because it is now, as I talk, 2017. I plan to make YouTube lecture videos on masculism. Once these 2 tasks are done, I will feel I have the mental energy to make a whole video course on masculism, a men's studies course on men's liberation. Well, I haven't done that yet. That's a major commitment. I have written over 120 of these flyers. Well, now it's about 200. So I have plenty of ideas and topics I can put into this course, so it won't be short. It will be a full course, suitable for study by serious students who want to be given a men's studies curriculum. I'm hoping that this course will get things moving, because I'm cynical of what the current MGTOWs are doing, or rather not doing. MGTOWs are making YouTube videos, which is a good thing, but are not going anywhere near far enough in my view, because essentially they are analysing the current plight of men in our current gynocentric society, where men are treated by society, by women, by the gender politicians as cash machines to pay for women to have babies, but are not pushing politically to change the gender status quo. That's always been my major complaint against the MGTOWs. In my video course on masculism, I will make a strong case and lay out a political plan on what needs to be done to liberate men from the traditional man-slave role. I can push very hard the nuclear weapon of the MGTOWs, that is their strongest argument, if only they had the vision to see it for what it is. This argument is, quote, if society and the gender politicians do not menfair society and the gender laws, then the MGTOWs and masculists will annihilate the population by continuing their paternity strike. This argument is extremely powerful. What is more important to humanity than the survival of humanity? If society and the gender politicians don't change their attitudes towards men, then the MGTOWs masculists will force them to by crashing the population size. This process is already a decade ahead of the Western countries in Japan, where thanks to the herbivore men, that's grass eaters, that's Japanese men who refuse to have relationships with women, they don't even sex women, 2/3 of young Japanese men under 35 now refuse to marry, refuse to have kids, and spend their money on themselves. They have rejected their father's traditional salary man-slave role of working 11-hour days, commuting 3 hours, handing over their paychecks to their fluffy housewives so that the wives can play tennis while the husbands overwork. By the way, I lived 8 years in Japan in the 90s. The young male generation in Japan is fed up with the salaryman role and are on strike. The Japanese population is already falling as a result. It has fallen by 1 million in just a few years. In 2 decades, after the baby boomers have died off, the Japanese population will have fallen to about 2/3 of its current figure, that is, to about 80 million. Japanese gender politicians are already pulling their hair out, wondering how to persuade young herbivore men to have babies and pay for them. These Japanese gender politicians will need to study closely the masculist course videos I will make in 2017. What is now happening in Japan will happen in Western countries too. Japan is not the only advanced nation with a birth rate of only 1.4 children per woman. Spain, Italy and Germany also have birth rates of 1.4. They too will wipe themselves out unless some radical changes are made in society to stop the, quote, population annihilation caused by men rejecting paternity. So where do I see MGTOW masculism in a decade? I expect that the broadcast media barrier will have been breached by the MGTOWs masculists. I'm hoping the very politicized, very angry masculist video course I will make will inspire similar videos to be made by other people so that a real momentum is built up, so that media people latch onto it and realize that the nuclear weapon argument of the MGTOWs masculist is valid and should be reported on and spread to the masses. At the moment, the MGTOW masculist movement is too small. Now remember, I wrote this was written 2 years ago in 2015. Now it's much bigger. It's too small for most broadcast journalists to take it seriously, but it only takes a handful of such journalists to pick up on its importance and report on it to get the ball rolling. Once the masses start hearing about the ideas of the MGTOWs masculists, and that's the case today, increasingly, then I expect the next development will be the establishment of men's lib groups in every high school and college, aiming at raising the consciousness of young men at high schools and colleges that it is not in their self-interest to marry, to have kids. Because if they do marry and have kids, in today's gynocentric society, with the fluffy feminists having taken over the divorce courts, such married fathers will have roughly a 1 in 4 chance of being financially massacred and having their lives ruined by losing custody of their kids, with a 90% probability losing their house to the fluffy ex-wife so that she can raise her kids in it, forced to pay child support and alimony to the fluffy ex-wife so that she can continue to be a fluffy, parasiting off him after the divorce the way she did before. This massive abuse of men so angers men that they are going on strike in massive numbers. In the US, according to recent US census, 70% of young men under 35 refuse to marry, refuse to have kids, and spend their money on themselves, just as do the herbivore men in Japan. The two cases are almost identical. In fact, this is a worldwide movement that has an enormous potential to be one of the greatest social phenomena of our historical era, because it has the potential to wipe out humanity if things don't change. Once the men's lib groups are established in the high schools and colleges, and the broadcast media are spreading MGTOW masculist ideas to the masses, the men's lib groups can move into high gear by putting enormous moral pressure on their female classmates, telling them, haranguing them, browbeating them to be FIPs and get a FIP major education that will enable them to become FIPs, financially independent persons, as adults, earning good salaries so that a woman can afford to buy her own apartment to raise kids in, so that she does not have to parasite off the money of some manslave. Masculists are very conscious of the critical importance of women becoming FIPs. The FIPification, or I tend to use the term simply now, FIPPing. The FIPPing of women will go a long way to solving most of men's gender problems. For example, one of the major legal reforms the masculists are pushing for is the legislation of the PARER, P-A-R-E-R, paternity rejection right, whose non-existence, given that the MARA, also known as abortion right, does exist, makes it one of the most blatant sexual discriminations against men that exists. With virtually all women as FIPs, it will be much easier to bring in a para so that men can refuse an undesired pregnancy, so that if the mother goes ahead with a pregnancy, then she has full financial responsibility for the kid. He simply fills in a governmental paternity rejection form and walks away from having his life ruined by a kid that he does not want. Having all women as FIPs will cause women to be less parasitic on men. Getting a FIP major education, e.g. in a STEM, that's S-T-E-M, science, tech, engineering and math, in a STEM field, will enable women to earn good money, giving them the confidence that they are indeed FIPs and don't need to have fluffy attitudes towards men. Such women are much more likely to behave as adults and not as irresponsible children, the way fluffies do. Once the men's lib groups are set up, all students at high school and college will become familiar with MGTOW masculist ideas, and that will change society. Social pressure will build up on women to change, to be FIP, to grow up, to pull their weight, to take responsibility for their own lives, and not expect men to do that for them. The next step I see happening will be to work on the gender politicians. The MGTOW masculist leaders can present in a very forceful manner the MGTOW masculist nuclear weapon argument, that is, the population annihilation argument, and use it with great effectiveness due to its enormous power. The gender politicians and society in general will be forced to sit up and listen, especially as the population statistics keep coming out each year, lower, lower, lower. The MGTOWs masculists, I see, will be pushing hard morally, putting enormous moral pressure on women to become FIPs and not parasite on a man. The masculists will tell women that if they're not FIPs, they will be punished by rotting on the shelf to extinction. They will not get a man. They will be manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and shunned by a masculist conscious society. In the 50s, there was no second wave feminism. By the 80s, that had changed. In the zeros, there was no MGTOW. But a decade from now, that will have changed too. Everyone will know about MGTOW masculist ideas a decade from now, so that moral pressure can be mounted on the gender politicians to change the gender laws. The two biggest reforms that the gender politicians need to make concern divorce and bringing in the para. There are many other legal discriminations against men that need to be systematically addressed. There will be such anger from men, and in such massive numbers, that if the gender politicians don't give men what men want, then they'll be voted out of office. Women will have become FIPs to a greater extent than is the case today, so there'll be a lot of understanding of women of the man-slave traditional role of men to pay for fluffies. Such women will be sympathetic to masculism and describe themselves as female masculists. MGTOWs masculists can keep reminding society that the gender politicians that things are not going to change, that is the population, I think there's a word missing, that things are not going to change, that is the population will keep falling unless society and the gender laws are made menfair. This argument will be pushed hard every year by the masculist MGTOWs, forcing society to listen. In time, everyone will be familiar with it, and most will agree with it, so that the social moral pressure on the gender politicians to make the necessary men-fairing reforms will force them to do what is necessary. That is my vision on where MGTOW masculism will be a decade from now. I may be off by some years, but I think the big picture will prove to be fairly accurate. It may be interesting to look back on this flyer in 2025, if I'm still alive, shudder, to see how perspicacious I was in 2016. Inconsistent. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. YouTube channel name DeGaris, Masculist, MGTOW, Flyers.